The last of them died in my cornfield. It lay there, a broken statue of gold and circuits, its single glowing eye pulsing with the last of its energy. It wasn't speaking to me. I think it was broadcasting. A final report to an empire that was already a graveyard. Its thoughts didn't come in words, but in feelings, in raw pictures that bloomed behind my eyes. Report final entry. Designate subject, humanity. Threat assessment, catastrophic, unforeseen. We came to this planet, the third from its star, expecting a simple cleansing. A primitive tribal species, technologically infantile. Their weapons were crude projectiles and fission-based explosives. Their biology was fragile, susceptible to our tailored plagues. The war was supposed to last 6 of their days. It was supposed to be easy. The golden thing, one of the gilded, shuddered. A trickle of mercury-like fluid ran from a crack in its neck. The miscalculation was not in their technology. It was not in their physical strength. We scanned their bodies, their cities, their weapons. We never scanned their minds. We did not understand the chaos within. We are a unity. One purpose, one thought. They are a cacophony. Every single one of them is a war unto themselves. We thought this division was a weakness. It was a plague. We touched their minds to extract information, and we were infected with it. Individuality, ego, rage, grief, hope. These were not concepts to be catalogued. They were living, viral things. The image it forced into my head was of a perfect, silent ocean of light, the gilded collective, then a single drop of black ink. A human thought fell into it. The blackness did not dissipate. It spread. It replicated. It taught the ocean how to be a storm. The war against humanity ended on the 7th day with our total victory. The war for our own soul began a moment later. It did not end. It consumed us. It followed our psychic pathways back to our home worlds. It turned brother against brother. It taught a unified race the meaning of the word I, and then it taught us the meaning of the word hate. Do not come here. Do not touch these creatures. Let this galaxy be their tomb, and let it be a warning. The war against humanity was easy. Surviving the victory was impossible. The light in its eye died. The broadcast was over. And I, Jedediah Stone, a farmer from Kansas, stood there in the silence, the last man on earth, listening to the ghost of a dead empire tell me how my broken heart had killed the universe. It had all started on a Tuesday. I was fixing a fence post, the sun hot on my neck. The air smelled of dry earth and cow manure. My dog Buster was chasing a grasshopper. It was the most normal day you could imagine. Sarah had been gone for a year by then, the cancer taking her slow and mean. Every day was a little less normal without her, but I was trying. The fence post was my little piece of trying. Then the sky broke. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a feeling. The air went thin and cold. Buster stopped chasing the grasshopper and started to whine, the fur on his back standing up straight. I looked up. The perfect blue sky had a crack in it, a long, black, jagged line like a piece of shattered glass. It wasn't a cloud. It was nothing. A tear in the fabric of the world. From the tear, the light came down. Not a gentle light. It was a hard, metallic gold light like a solid thing. It fell in pillars, striking the earth without a sound. One hit Miller's farm, 5 miles east. Another hit the town of Haven just beyond the ridge. A third one landed right in my south pasture. There was no explosion, no fire, just a sudden, terrible silence. The birds stopped singing. The wind died. I stood there by my fence post, hammer in hand, a dumb animal watching the end of the world. From the pillar of light in my pasture, a shape emerged. It was tall and slender, made of the same golden light, but solid now. It looked like a walking Academy Award statue, perfectly smooth, featureless except for a single, circular blue eye in the center of its head. One of the gilded. It took a step onto my land. And I knew right down in my bones that this was it. This was the thing that came after normal. They took me without a word. The gilded thing that stepped out of the light didn't run. It didn't need to. It just walked toward me, its movements unnervingly smooth, like a drop of oil flowing over glass. Buster, bless his stupid loyal heart, ran at it, barking his head off. The gilded one didn't even look down. It raised a hand, and my dog just stopped. He froze mid-stride, a statue of fur and teeth, and then he fell over, silent. Not dead. I knew somehow he wasn't dead. Just paused. I swung the hammer. It was a stupid human thing to do. The gilded caught it in its hand, the metal of the hammer head making a dull thud against its golden palm. It didn't even flinch. It simply took the hammer from my grip, its fingers impossibly strong, and let it drop to the dirt. Then it put its hand on my forehead. The world dissolved into white noise. It wasn't painful, it was just empty. All my thoughts, all my memories of Sarah, of the farm, of the taste of coffee in the morning, they were all swept away in a cold, sterile tide. When I came back to myself, I was somewhere else. The room was vast and white. The light came from the walls themselves, a soft, even glow, with no source and no shadows. I was lying on a low white platform. Around me were hundreds of other people on identical platforms. My neighbors, Dale from the hardware store, Mrs. Gable, the elementary school teacher, even Sheriff Brody. They all had the same look on their faces. A blank, stunned emptiness. We were cattle in a pristine alien slaughterhouse. The gilded moved among us. There were dozens of them. Their silence was the most terrifying part. A room full of hundreds of captured humans and their silent golden captors. The only sound was a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in your teeth. They were processing us. One of them would stop by a platform, place a hand on a person's head, and stand perfectly still for about a minute. The person's eyes would flutter. Sometimes they would weep silently, tears tracking through the dirt on their faces. Then the gilded would move on. They were downloading us, taking every memory, every bit of knowledge. They were stripping us bare. I watched, numb and helpless. I saw them get to Mrs. Gable. She was an old woman, had taught 3 generations of kids in Haven. She'd lost her husband in a car wreck 20 years ago. I knew this because she told everyone, all the time. Her grief was a part of her, like her white hair and her spectacles. The gilded put its hand on her head. And for the first time, something different happened. The gilded stood there, its blue eye fixed on the old woman. A few seconds passed, then it flinched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible thing, but I saw it. Its smooth, golden body gave a little shudder, like a man touching a hot stove. It took its hand away from Mrs. Gable's forehead. It looked at its own palm, turning it over and over, as if it had gotten something sticky on it. Then it did something I would never have thought possible. It brought its other hand up and pressed its palms to the sides of its own head. A very human gesture, the gesture of a sudden, splitting headache. Another gilded glided over to it, and they stood there, face to face, their blue eyes pulsing. There was no sound, but I felt a flicker of something in the air, a vibration of unease. of confusion. They were telepathic. They were sharing what the first one had experienced. And what it had experienced. And what it had experienced. What it had taken from a grieving old schoolteacher. Was something their sterile, unified minds had no category for. A 20-year-old loss that still felt as fresh as yesterday. An ache that had become a part of a person's soul. The second Gilded staggered back a step. A crack had appeared in their perfect, silent wall. It was a tiny crack, but it was there. And it was made of human sorrow. I looked over at Mrs. Gable. She was still staring blankly at the ceiling, but a small, sad smile was on her lips. She was probably dreaming of her husband. She was fighting a war she didn't even know she was in, and she was winning. The change was slow at first. Then it was like watching a dam break in increments. The Gilded continued their work, but the machine was starting to stutter. The perfect synchronicity was gone. They used to move like a school of fish, a single organism with many bodies. Now they moved like people. They bumped into each other. They hesitated. I saw one of them processing a young man, a teenager I recognized from the gas station. The kid was terrified, but underneath the terror, there was a seething teenage rebellion, a pure, directionless anger at the world. The Gilded that touched him recoiled as if it had been burned. It didn't clutch its head. It clenched its fists. Its smooth, featureless body tensed up, its shoulders bunching in a way that was disturbingly familiar. It was a posture of aggression. Another Gilded approached it, and instead of the silent communion I'd seen before, the angry one shoved it. It was a clumsy, forceful push. The other Gilded stumbled backward, its blue eye flaring with what I could only describe as surprise. Then the first one turned and punched the white wall of the room. It left no mark, but the act itself was astounding. It was a tantrum, a creature of pure logic and unity throwing a tantrum. They had absorbed the boy's anger, and they didn't know what to do with it. It was a poison in their shared blood. The processing became erratic. Some Gilded would stop in the middle of a scan, their bodies trembling. I saw one of them crouched in a corner, its head in its hands, rocking back and forth. It had just processed a man who suffered from severe anxiety. Now the Gilded was having a panic attack. We, the captured, were starting to come out of our stupor. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by the dawning, terrifying realization of our situation. Fear began to ripple through the prisoners. Whispers started hushed and desperate. What do they want? Are they going to kill us? This fear was a new flavor for the Gilded. They had expected to find tactical knowledge, scientific data, weaknesses. They found our messy, irrational, deeply human baggage instead, and it was breaking them. My turn came. A Gilded stopped at my platform. It was one of the calm ones, one that still seemed unaffected. It looked down at me with its unblinking blue eye. I braced myself for the cold emptiness. It placed its hand on my forehead. But I didn't let my mind go blank. I thought of Sarah. I didn't fight it. I opened the floodgates. I gave it everything. I gave it the memory of our first date, the awkward fumbling in my old pickup truck. I gave it the image of her smiling at me over a birthday cake, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I gave it the warmth of her hand in mine as we walked through the cornfields in autumn. I gave it the joy, the pure, unvarnished joy of loving her. And then I gave it the rest. I gave it the memory of the doctor's face, the pity in his eyes. I gave it the smell of the hospital, antiseptic and despair. I gave it the long nights sitting by her bed, holding her hand as it grew colder, listening to her breath grow shallow. I gave it the final, ragged gasp, I gave it the silence in the house after the funeral. I gave it the gut-wrenching, soul-crushing black hole of grief that had lived inside me for the last year. I gave it the love and the loss, twisted together into one unbearable knot. The Gilded screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a psychic shockwave that slammed through the room. Every human cried out and clutched their heads. The white walls seemed to ripple. The Gilded stumbled back from me, its hands smoking, not from heat, but from some kind of psychic friction. Its blue eye was flickering wildly between blue and a furious, painful red. It looked at me, and for the first time I saw an expression on one of their faces. It wasn't a real expression, not on that smooth metallic surface. But I felt it. I felt it radiating from its mind. A raw, undiluted mixture of confusion, agony, and a terrible, terrible sorrow. It had tasted my grief, and it was drowning. The scream had torn something loose in the fabric of the place. The low hum of the facility faltered, replaced by a discordant chattering, like a radio scanning between 1,000 stations of static. The other Gilded stopped what they were doing. They all turned to look at the one that had touched me, the one that was now clutching its head, its body twitching. It was leaking. The mercury-like fluid I had seen on the one in my cornfield was weeping from the joints in its elbows and knees. Its perfect golden skin began to dull, turning the color of old brass. It was dying. My memories were killing it. It didn't weep, it went rigid. It slowly straightened up, taking its hand from the sergeant's head. It turned to face the Gilded next to it. Its movements were no longer smooth and flowing. They were sharp, economical, deadly. In a single brutal motion, it drove its pointed fingers into the chest of its fellow. The victim made no sound, but its blue eye went dark instantly. It crumpled to the floor, a heap of inert metal. The killer stood over the body, its head tilted. It had absorbed the sergeant's decades of training, his killer instinct, his understanding of violence as a tool. It had learned how to murder. And, judging by the way it was now scanning the room, it liked it. That was the turning point. The psychic infection became a physical one. The Gilded, who had absorbed anger, started shoving and hitting. The ones who had absorbed fear huddled together, creating a trembling golden mass in one corner. The one who had absorbed the sergeant's training began to systematically stalk and execute its confused and panicking brethren. The facility had been a processing center. Now it was an asylum and a battlefield. The humans were a secondary concern now. We were just the source of the plague. The Gilded ignored us, completely consumed by their own sudden, violent disunity. They had been a single vast mind. Now, there were 100 fractured personalities trapped in a room, each one armed with a body of superhuman strength. A Gilded that had processed some poor soul with paranoia began to shriek silently, pointing at shadows, its psychic terror washing over us in waves. Two others began what looked like a territorial dispute, drawing an invisible line on the floor between them, and gesturing with a newfound ugly possessiveness. They had learned the concept of mine. The one who had touched me was still twitching on the floor, caught in a feedback loop of my love and loss. It wasn't just experiencing my grief. It was experiencing it with the full amplified power of a telepathic mind. Over and over again, the memory of Sarah's smile followed by the memory of her death. A cycle of heaven and hell, 1,000 times a second. Its body began to literally fall apart, plates of its golden skin peeling away to reveal a network of pulsing light-filled cables. The cables sparked and went dark. I looked at the chaos erupting around me and felt a cold dawning horror. We weren't fighting them. We were contagious. Our very nature, our loves, our hates, our fears, our memories, was the weapon. We didn't need guns or bombs. We just needed to be human. Sheriff Brody was on the platform next to mine. He was a practical man. He looked at me, then at the carnage, then back at me. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. "What did you do, Jed?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I just remembered my wife," I said. And the words felt like the truest and most terrible thing I had ever said. The killer gilded finished its work. It was the only one left standing that seemed to have a purpose. The rest were either dead, catatonic, or lost in loops of whatever human emotion they had been unlucky enough to absorb. It stood in the center of the room, a silent golden butcher, and then its blue eye fixed on the main door of the vast chamber. With calm, deliberate steps, it walked to the door and tore it from its hinges. An alarm, a high-pitched warbling siren, finally began to sound. The killer didn't even notice. It stepped out into the corridor beyond, on its way to spread its newfound talent to the rest of the occupation. And in its wake, it left us an open door. "We have to go now." Sheriff Brody's voice cut through my shock. He was already off his platform, moving with a cop's practiced urgency. He was right. The asylum was about to be wide open. Getting people to move was like trying to herd stunned sheep. Most were still half lost in the fog of the initial capture, now layered with the psychic backlash from the Gilded's meltdown. I scrambled off my own platform, my legs shaky. "Up! Get up!" Brody yelled, his voice echoing in the huge white room. He started pulling people to their feet. I joined him, grabbing the arm of a dazed-looking woman. "Come on," I said, my voice rough. "We're leaving." The scene around us was a surreal nightmare. Golden bodies lay scattered like fallen chess pieces. A few were still moving. One was tracing patterns on the floor, with its finger lost in some downloaded fantasy. Another was repeatedly bashing its head against a wall, a rhythm of silent, percussive despair. The panic-stricken ones were still huddled in their corner, a quivering sculpture of terror. We didn't have to fight our way out. We just had to walk past them. They were so consumed by the human emotions warring inside them that they barely registered our existence. We were the ghosts at their feast of madness. I led a small group, maybe 20 people, toward the door the killer Gilded had ripped open. As I passed the one I had broken, the one filled with my grief, it stirred. It lifted its head, its red and blue eye flickering. It looked at me, and in its gaze I felt a flicker of something new. Not just pain, recognition. And a strange, terrible gratitude. It had lived its entire existence as a drop in an ocean. I had, in my own way, given it a name. Then its head fell back, and the light in its eye went out for good. The corridor outside was just as sterile and white as the main chamber, but it was filled with the warbling alarm. It stretched in either direction, a long, antiseptic hallway. We hesitated for a second. Left or right? The choice was made for us. From the right, we heard it. The psychic scream. It was sharper this time, more focused. It was followed by the sound of metal tearing. The killer was at work down that way. "Left," Brody said, and no one argued. We moved as a single, terrified unit. A strange collection of farmers, store clerks, and teachers padding silently down the corridors of an alien ship. Every new hallway looked the same as the last. It was a maze. We were lab rats who had escaped our cage, only to find ourselves in a bigger one. Then we heard another sound, not a scream. Words garbled, nonsensical English words. "Get out," a voice said. It was metallic, distorted, like a bad recording. "Get out of my head. My head. Mine." We rounded a corner and saw it. A single gilded, standing in the middle of the hallway. It wasn't one of the killers or the cowering ones. It was talking to itself. It had processed someone, maybe someone with schizophrenia, and now its unified mind was fractured into a committee of warring voices. "No," it said in the same robotic voice. "Stay. We are one. We are gilded." Then its posture changed, becoming more aggressive. "I hate you. I want to be me." It saw us. Its blue eye flared. It took a step toward us. We all froze, but it wasn't looking at us with aggression. It was looking with pleading. "Help," the metallic voice said. "It's too loud." A young woman in our group, a girl named Chloe who worked at the diner, started to cry. A quiet, hopeless sound. The gilded flinched. The sound of her despair was like a physical blow to it. It staggered back, clutching its head. "Too much," it whispered. "Too much sorrow." We didn't run, we just stood there. A miserable, frightened group of people, and our misery was a shield. Our fear was a weapon. The gilded couldn't get near us. It was like we had a psychic fever, and it was terrified of catching it. It turned and fled down the hallway, its own stolen words chasing it. We kept moving, deeper into the ship, or base, or whatever it was. The further we went, the more signs of the chaos we saw. A corridor wall was scorched, not by a weapon, but by a gilded who had absorbed a pyromaniac's obsession and somehow turned it into reality. We saw two of them locked in a bizarre, silent wrestling match. A conflict born from some downloaded sibling rivalry. We saw one trying to paint on the walls, with its own mercury blood, trying to replicate a memory of art it had stolen. The result, a grotesque, meaningless smear. The Gilded Empire wasn't being overthrown. It was committing suicide, driven mad by the homeopathic dose of humanity it had ingested, and we, the architects of its downfall, were just trying to find a way back into the sun. We found the outside by following the change in the air. The sterile, recycled atmosphere of the corridors gave way to something fresh, something real. It smelled of ozone and damp earth. It was the smell of a storm. The exit was another huge open portal, a perfect circle of light leading out into the gray Kansas twilight. We hesitated at the threshold, blinking like newborn animals. The world we had left behind just hours ago felt like a lifetime away. The gilded structure wasn't a ship on the ground. It was more like the tip of an iceberg. The massive white chamber we'd been in was underground. We were emerging from a kind of hill that hadn't been there that morning. It was smooth and white, like the rest of the structure, already dewed with evening condensation. The sky was a bruised purple, shot through with veins of lightning from a distant thunderhead. But that wasn't the only light in the sky. Far above, pinpricks of golden light were moving erratically. Some were tumbling, end over end. As we watched, one of them flared brightly and then vanished. A gilded ship, a casualty of the psychic civil war that was now raging in orbit, as well as on the ground. The perfect silent occupation was in tatters. Their communications network, the very thing that made them a hive mind, was now their greatest vulnerability. It was broadcasting the virus of human emotion at the speed of light. Every gilded in the system was now getting a taste of rage from the Marine Sergeant, of grief from me, of paranoia and anxiety and irrational joy from 1,000 other downloaded minds. The infection was going stellar. Our small group of survivors stood on the alien hill watching the sky fall. There was no sense of victory. No one cheered. We just watched the silent golden fireworks with a profound sense of dread. We had survived the invasion. Now we had to survive the liberation. My only thought was of home. My farm, it was a primal instinct, the need for a familiar place in a world that had become utterly alien. "My farm is just over that ridge," I said, pointing. My voice was quiet, but in the stillness everyone heard me. "We can get there. T here is a cellar. We can hide." Sheriff Brody nodded, his face grim. Good as any plan. We scrambled down the slick, weirdly smooth side of the gilded hill. The ground felt blessedly real beneath my boots. The grass was wet. I could smell the rain coming. Simple, physical things. There were anchors in the madness. We walked through the south pasture. The pillar of light that had brought the gilded was gone. There was just a perfect circle of scorched grass, black and sterile. I walked over to where Buster had fallen. He was gone. The gilded must have taken him inside. A fresh pang of loss, small but sharp, hit me. Another drop of poison for the invaders, I thought with a grim sense of irony. As we neared the ridge, we saw more evidence of the gilded's collapse. One of their floating platforms, a small transport skiff, was crashed into a line of oak trees. It was crumpled and smoking. There were no bodies. We crested the ridge and looked down on the town of Haven, or what was left of it. It wasn't destroyed by weapons. It was just wrong. Gilded structures, the same sterile white hills, were pushed up through the middle of Main Street in the town square, through the roof of the high school. Their occupation had been precise, like pins on a map. But now, it looked like a madman's art project. And there was movement. Gilded on the ground. They weren't marching. They weren't patrolling. They were wandering. One was walking in slow, tight circles. Another was standing on a rooftop, its arms spread wide, as if waiting for a hug or a bullet. Two more were engaged in a silent, slow-motion fight near the gas station. Their movements clumsy and full of a borrowed theatrical rage. The town of Haven was an open-air insane asylum. "We go around," Brody said, his voice low. "We don't go through there." We skirted the edge of the town, sticking to the woods. The sun had set now, and the only light came from the lightning and the dying gilded tech. A golden glow pulsed from the center of the town, a sickening, unhealthy light. We could feel the psychic noise even from this distance, a low thrum of chaotic emotion that made your teeth ache and your skin crawl. It was the sound of a god going mad. My farmhouse was dark. It stood on its little hill, a silhouette against the storm-racked sky. It looked normal. It looked safe. But I knew that was an illusion. There was no safe place left in the world. Maybe not in the whole universe. We were just running from one part of the fire to another. But it was my fire. It was my home, and I had to get back to it. From the safety of my cellar, we watched the world end on a broken television. The cellar was small and cramped, smelling of damp earth and canned peaches. There were 15 of us down there. We had found a hand-cranked generator and hooked it up to an old black and white television I kept for storm warnings. For the first day, the channels were all static. Then flickering images started to come through. Not from our news stations, they were all gone. These were gilded transmissions, their internal feeds, now fractured and leaking into our broadcast frequencies. We saw what was happening in New York, in London and Tokyo, It was the same as what had happened in Haven, but on a terrifying scale. Gilded were fighting Gilded in the streets. Their perfect architecture was crumbling. The ships were falling from the sky like rain. But there was something else. The transmissions were corrupted. Fleeting images of human life kept flashing through the chaos. A child's birthday party, a crowded beach, a rock concert, a quiet moment between two lovers on a park bench. These were the memories they had stolen, the data that was poisoning them. The memories were playing on a loop, like a virus that had taken over the operating system. One broadcast was particularly clear. It showed the view from a Gilded's own eye. The perspective was jerky, panicked. The Gilded was running through one of its own corridors. It was being hunted. Other Gilded, the killers, were behind it. But the audio was a woman's voice whispering in French, a love poem. The Gilded was broadcasting its terror, but it was overlaid with a stolen memory of a long-dead Parisian poet. The juxtaposition was sickening. We were watching the death of a hive mind from the inside out. It wasn't a war. It was a psychological plague, and we were the carriers. I got to see it from their perspective, not just through the television, but inside my own head. Sometimes, a wave of it would wash over me, a psychic echo from their dying network. I'd be sitting there, listening to the generator crank, and suddenly I would feel a jolt of pure, unadulterated rage that wasn't mine. I would feel a moment of profound, suicidal despair over the loss of a mate, with 3 arms on a world I'd never seen. I would experience a flash of joy at solving a complex mathematical equation, a joy so pure and clean it felt alien. Their consciousness was shredding, and the pieces were blowing through the air like psychic shrapnel. We were all getting hit by it. Chloe, the waitress, spent an hour convinced she was a Gilded military commander, issuing silent, telepathic orders to the jam jars on the shelf. Sheriff Brody had a 5-minute fugue state, where he just stared at his hands, overwhelmed by the alien sensation of having only 2 of them. The infection was a 2-way street. They had caught our humanity, and now we were catching glimpses of their alienness in the fallout. Days bled into one another. We rationed the canned peaches and crackers. The psychic noise from the outside world slowly began to fade. The broadcasts on the television became weaker, more sporadic, until finally there was only static once more. The constant, low-level thrum of madness that had been pressing in on us receded. After what we thought was a week, the silence became absolute. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a deep, profound, and unnatural quiet. The silence of a graveyard. "Something's changed," Brody said, his voice hushed in the dark cellar. "It's over," Chloe whispered. "They're gone." I didn't think so. It wasn't the silence of absence, it was the silence of completion. The silence after the last scream. I was the one to unbar the cellar door. I had to know. I pushed it open and climbed the wooden steps into my kitchen. The house was just as I had left it. A thin layer of dust covered everything. Sunlight, bright and clear, streamed through the windows. The storm had passed. I walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The world was clean. The sky was a perfect, aching blue. The gilded structures that had scarred the landscape were gone. Not destroyed, just gone. There were no ruins, no wreckage. The perfect circles of scorched earth were still there in the fields, but the invaders themselves had vanished. So had everyone else. The group from my cellar dispersed. They went to find their homes, their families. They left one by one, with grim faces and quiet promises to check back in. None of them ever did. I was alone. I spent days walking. I walked to Haven. The town was empty. Doors were wide open. Cars were stopped in the middle of the street. It was a ghost town, but a fresh one. It was like everyone had just evaporated. I walked to Miller's farm, the same thing. An empty house. A half-eaten meal on the table. They hadn't just killed the Gilded. The psychic cataclysm had taken everyone. Maybe it was the final massive psychic scream of the hive mind as it died. A wave of pure agony and madness that had washed over the planet and scoured it clean. Or maybe in their final moments, the Gilded had taken everyone with them. A final act of spite from a dying god. The war hadn't just ended, it had erased the board, and I, for some reason, had been left behind. I was the last man on Earth. A king on a throne of ashes. The loneliness was a physical thing. It was a weight in my chest, a constant ringing in my ears. In the first few weeks, I kept expecting to see someone. I'd be out in the fields trying to get the old tractor running, and I'd see a flicker of movement at the edge of the woods, and my heart would leap. But it was always a deer or the wind in the leaves. The animals were still here. The deer, the coyotes, the birds. Even Buster came back. I found him one morning on the porch, skinny and confused, but alive. The Gilded's pause effect must have worn off when they died. I wept when I saw him, burying my face in his dusty fur. He was a warm breathing thing in a world of ghosts. A heartbeat other than my own. I tried the radio every day. A big old shortwave set I kept in the barn. I'd spend hours turning the dial, listening to the static. I broadcasted my own message, over and over. This is Jedediah Stone at Stone Farm, near Haven, Kansas. Is there anyone out there? Anyone at all? Only the static ever answered. The silence was what told me the true scale of what had happened. It wasn't just my town or my state. The psychic plague, the storm of human emotion, had traveled up the Gilded psychic network to their ships, their colonies, their home worlds. And then, when their entire galactic network overloaded and collapsed, the death scream must have echoed back. A psychic pulse of unimaginable power. It didn't just kill the Gilded, it wiped the slate clean. I had killed everyone. My grief, my stupid human grief for one woman, had been amplified and weaponized and broadcast across the stars. It had mixed with the rage of a soldier, and the fear of a school teacher, and the madness of 1,000 other broken minds. We had created a bomb made of feelings, and it had detonated in the heart of our enemy, destroying them and us in the blast. We didn't win. There were no winners. We were just the poison. I fell into a routine, a lonely, pointless routine. I worked the farm. I planted corn, not because I needed to feed a nation, but because it was what my hands knew how to do. I talked to Buster. I talked to the ghosts. I'd sit on the porch swing in the evenings, a glass of whiskey in my hand, and talk to Sarah as if she was sitting right next to me. "We did it, honey," I'd say to the empty air. "We beat 'em. Cost a bit much, though." Sometimes I'd laugh, a dry, cracked sound, the last joke in the universe. The nights were the worst. The sky was so full of stars, brighter than I had ever seen them without the light pollution from the towns. I'd look up at them and feel the crushing weight of all that empty space. Up there were the home worlds of the Gilded, silent and dead. And around me was my own world, just as silent, just as dead. I was the caretaker of a planetary cemetery. One night, months into the silence, I saw a light in the sky. It wasn't a star. It was moving. a single falling golden tear. It streaked across the heavens, slower than a meteor, trailing a thin plume of smoke. It was a gilded ship, a survivor, or at least a straggler to the grave. I watched it fall, tracing its long arc across the sky. It was heading west toward the mountains. It disappeared behind the horizon, and a few minutes later, a faint, silent pulse of light illuminated the clouds. It had crashed. For the first time in a long time, I felt something other than grief or loneliness. I felt curiosity. A terrible, dangerous curiosity. Was something alive in that wreck? Another gilded? Or was it just the last falling piece of a machine that had already died? I had to know. The next morning I packed the truck with supplies, filled up the tank from the pump at the abandoned gas station in Haven, and with Buster in the passenger seat, I started driving west. I was going hunting for a ghost. The drive took 3 days. The roads were empty, littered with stopped cars. It was a strange and eerie pilgrimage through a silent America. I drove past ghost cities, their glass towers reflecting the empty blue sky. I saw herds of deer grazing in suburban parks. Nature was already starting to reclaim the world. I found the crash site in the foothills of the Rockies. The ship wasn't big. It was a small scout-class vessel, shaped like a polished river stone. It had plowed a long, deep furrow through a pine forest before coming to rest in a small valley. The golden metal was scorched and blackened. One side was torn open, revealing a tangle of dead circuits. It felt inert, dead. Another monument to the silent apocalypse. I left Buster at the truck and approached it cautiously, a shotgun in my hands. The silence here was even deeper than in the flatlands of Kansas. The air was thin and cold. I peered into the gash in the ship's hull. The inside was dark and smelled of burnt metal and ozone. It looked empty. I was about to turn away, to write it off as just another piece of cosmic junk when I saw it. A light. A faint, pulsing blue light deep inside the wreckage. My heart hammered in my chest. I took a deep breath, clicked the safety off the shotgun, and climbed inside. The floor was tilted at a steep angle. I navigated through a maze of broken conduits and panels. The blue light grew stronger as I went deeper. And then I found it. It was a gilded, the last one. It was wedged between two humming power consoles, its body broken and twisted. One of its legs was torn off. Its golden skin was cracked and flaking. But its single blue eye was lit, pulsing with a weak rhythmic light. It was alive. I raised the shotgun, the bead sight centering on its head. This was it, the last enemy. I could end it. Put a final punctuation mark on the whole sorry story. But I hesitated. The gilded wasn't looking at me with aggression. It wasn't even looking with the blank, empty stare of the ones I'd seen before the fall. There was something else in its eye, something I recognized. It was tired. It looked utterly, bone-deeply weary. It lifted a trembling hand, not in attack, but in a gesture of peace. And then it reached out to me with its mind. It wasn't the overwhelming, cold psychic assault from the processing center. This was different. It was a hesitant, gentle touch. A question, not a demand. It was like a shy child reaching out to touch my hand. I lowered the shotgun. I let it in. It didn't show me complex tactical data or try to steal my memories. It showed me a single image, a feeling. It showed me a world with a sky the color of lavender. It showed me crystalline cities that sang in the wind. It showed me gilded, before the unity, before the sterile perfection. They were beings of light and energy, individuals full of art and music, and a kind of joy that was so pure it made my heart ache. Then it showed me the change. A philosopher, a leader, had proposed the great unity, a way to end all conflict, all pain, all ego, a merging of minds into one perfect, harmonious whole. They had embraced it willingly. They had sacrificed their I for the we, and for millennia it had worked. They had achieved perfect peace, perfect order, but in doing so they had forgotten something. They had forgotten how to hurt, and they had forgotten how to heal. Then it showed me its own story. It was a scientist, a data collector. It had been one of the first to analyze the human captives. It had been the one to process the Marine sergeant. It had been flooded with rage, with the instinct to kill. But another gilded, its partner in the lab, had just processed a pacifist Quaker. It had been flooded with a profound sense of peace and love. The two of them, infected with polar opposite human emotions, had not fought. They had been paralyzed, caught in a state of perfect psychic contradiction. They had hidden on the scout ship while their world tore itself apart, and they had fled. But the echoes of the psychic apocalypse had still reached them. The Gilded's partner, unable to reconcile the violence it was witnessing across the network with the peace it had absorbed, had simply faded. Its consciousness dissolved. This one, the scientist, was all that was left. A single broken mind infected with the ghost of a human soldier's fury, but with no one left to fight. It was alone, just like me. The last image it showed me was of my own face, reflected in its blue eye, and the feeling that came with it was one I understood completely: regret. A profound, soul-shattering regret for a war that should never have been started. I sat down on the floor of the broken ship, the shotgun useless in my lap. I was face to face with the last of my enemies, and all I felt was a terrible, shared pity. We were two ghosts in a graveyard of our own making. We sat there in the wreckage for a long time, the last man and the last Gilded. The silence between us was not empty. It was filled with a shared, unspoken understanding. We were the survivors. We were the curators of the Galactic Museum of Failure. The Gilded's light was fading. Its life support, or whatever passed for it, was failing. The blue eye pulsed slower and slower. It knew it was dying. And it had one last thing it needed to do. It began to broadcast. Not to me, not to any receiver, but out, into the void. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into a cosmic ocean, for anyone who might, in a million years, happen to find it. I was just a witness. I felt the broadcast as a story, unfolding in my mind, the final report I'd heard a lifetime ago in my cornfield. But this time, I was hearing it from the source. This was the original. Repaired, final entry, the thoughts began, calm and clear, tinged with an infinite sadness. Designate subject: humanity. Threat assessment: extinction level, not by their design but by their nature. The Gilded showed me again the image of their perfect unified consciousness, the silent sea of light. We were arrogant. We saw their divisions, their conflicts, their chaotic emotions, and we labeled them primitive. We believed our unity was a sign of our superiority. It was a cage of our own making, a sterile, windless room. It showed me the first contact, not the invasion, the first psychic scan, the Gilded probe touching the mind of a single human. It wasn't a soldier or a scientist. It was a child, a little girl on a playground, crying because she had fallen and scraped her knee. The first thing we learned from them was pain. And it was immediately followed by a second concept, when the girl's mother ran to her, picked her up, and held her. The second concept was comfort. Pain and comfort. Rage and forgiveness. Despair and hope. Their minds were a symphony of contradictions. We were a single monotonous note. The story continued, the one I knew so well now. The invasion, the processing, the infection, the spread of individuality like a virus. It showed me gilded experiencing jealousy for the first time over a perceived slight. It showed me two of them arguing over the memory of a beautiful sunset, both claiming the stolen memory as their own. It showed me the birth of ego, the birth of selfishness, the birth of murder. They did not defeat us with weapons. They defeated us by showing us a mirror. We saw in their minds all the things we had sacrificed for our peace, the glorious, terrible, beautiful chaos of being an individual. And it drove us mad. The desire for it, the fear of it. Our collective mind could not hold both the memory of its own perfection and the sudden screaming desire to be me. The gilded light flickered. It was almost gone. We came to their world to extinguish a flickering candle. Instead, we plunged the galaxy into darkness. Our psychic network, our greatest achievement, became the conduit for our own extinction, carrying the plague of the human soul to every corner of our empire. The final cataclysm was not a battle. It was the collective, psychic death scream of 10 trillion minds, rediscovering loneliness all at once. It showed me a final image, a warning, a plea to the empty universe. If anyone receives this, understand. Do not judge a species by its technology or its biology. There are forces deeper than that. There are souls, and some are more potent than stars. Avoid this sector. Avoid this small blue world. It is not a cradle of life, it is a tomb. A tomb for them and a tomb for us. We thought the war against humanity would be easy. We were wrong, we won. And the victory was a galactic extinction event. The last thought faded. The blue light in the gilded's eye went out. The last of them was dead. I sat in the dark, silent ship for a long time. Then I got up, climbed out of the wreckage, and walked back to my truck. Buster whined and licked my hand. I drove back to Kansas. Back to my farm. There was nothing else to do. Now I sit on my porch. The sun is setting. The corn I planted is growing tall. The world is quiet. I am Jedediah Stone, a farmer. I am the man who remembered his dead wife so hard that it killed the universe. I look up at the stars coming out in the purple sky. They are beautiful, and they are all empty. The war against humanity was supposed to be easy. It was. We lost in a week, but we had a secret weapon we never even knew about. Ourselves.